Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are going to give it a few more moments to let more people join the call because I can see the numbers rising really quickly, which is great to see. So welcome to anyone that's new to the call. Feel free to say hi on the chat below, which I'm sure will be very busy with everyone asking Sandor questions later on. So please join and welcome, and we'll just give it a few more moments. Wonderful. I think we should get going because I know it's going to be a really busy session. So hello, everybody, and thank you for joining the 9th episode of our Tandem Talks. So we are our Tandem, a continuous performance management platform provider with a vision to inspire human interactions and accelerate performance. And our Tandem Talks is our thought leadership content webinar series, where we invite thought leaders, business leaders, and HR leaders to join us and share their expertise and their insights. And today we are delighted to be joined by Sandor Janosi. In Sandor's last role, he led HR for GE Hydro globally as CHRO. He led through global integrations and led significant organizational change. And today, Sandor is going to be talking to us about the hot topic of performance ratings through the GE experience. We'd love this to be an interactive session, so please feel free to comment in the chat box below and the Q&A, and our CEO of our Tandem, Aisling Tayar, will be joining us for the second half of the session to be moderating some Q&A with Sandor. And the final note from me is that this session will be being recorded. So I know it's going to be action-packed and a great agenda, and we're really looking forward to it. So over to you, Sandor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Megan, and hello and welcome to everybody. So thanks for the quick introduction. As you heard, Megan, I'm a GE veteran, 21 years with the company, and where else you could learn more about performance management and GE. That's the reason why I joined GE back in 1999. Now, while performance management might be really exciting and interesting to all of us, I need to tell you maybe a few words about why is it specifically important to me. What's so special about why I take this as a personal topic. And for that one, you need to see that I grew up in a country which is Hungary, that up to my young teenage years used to be called as a socialist country, or behind the Iron Curtain. That was a very different type of society compared to today. And what I observed in my young teenage years on my parents actually is that in their workplaces, in this economy, in this country, in order for them to advance, to progress, there was little to no connection to their performance. Actually, I heard stories where people need to build relationships, they need to get into the political party, the Communist Party, and then without that, you cannot make a career. So very early on, I actually decided that I either going to leave this country or do something very different. I was very lucky that the world changed around myself and I didn't have to leave the country. But somehow in the back of my mind, this made a huge impact on myself. And that's one of the reasons why I was searching at the beginning of my career to work for a company where there's no question about meritocracy. And I can work for an organization where my advancement will only depend on how do I perform. And that's why I joined an American company at the beginning of my career. And this is the same reason why I joined GE when I moved into HR. And I wanted to learn all about performance management. And at the end, if you think about our roles as HR, what else than performance management we are here to work on? Yes, I mean, our business leaders, first and foremost, expect us to get the best out of our people and to get their performance translated into business results. And that's what is the most exciting part of HR to me. Now, so talking a little bit about the GE experience, and as you probably some of you know, or some of you might even have been with GE, like myself. GE went all the way. We have a very strong meritocracy culture, and GE went all the way from a very strong forced ranking system in performance management to no ratings, and then at the last couple of years started to reconsider and maybe take a couple of steps back and stay with some kind of a rating. So I'm going to talk to you more about that. But before I do that, Megan, maybe you can bring up, we have a little bit of a small survey. I would love to understand the audience. If you can bring up the questions. So in your organizations today, how many of you are using still a forced ranking system? How many of you are using a numbers or scale-based overall rating system? Should it be a 5-scale rating or 10 or 7 or 3? How many of you are using a multiple rating? So maybe a performance management scale, but another one as well, like behavioral or values ratings. How many of you have performance rating directly linked to a reward outcome? So either the salary increase or bonuses or some other rewards are linked to this performance rating. And last but not least, how many of you are either experimenting in your organization or already have experience and built up some time with a no rating system? So let's see how we get back some answers. So fantastic. So we have some teams here with no ratings. That's great. Some of the organizations, actually, I would have expected a bit more linked to rewards, but it's interesting, 31%. And still some forced ranking. So quite a mix of different type of system. That's fantastic. And that's exactly what we wanted to just have a look for starting our discussion. So let's see how we evolved in GE. And some of you might know that in the good old days of GE, let's put it this way, in the Jack Welch days, I had the honor to hear him directly to talk about performance management. And that's the time when we had forced ranking, a very strong forced ranking system. And for the ones who are not 100% familiar with forced ranking, obviously it's that you're kind of forcing your performance management ratings into a normal curve type of graph, and you obviously splitting that up to several ratings. We used to have 5 ratings at the beginning in GE, then we went down to 4, and then we ultimately crystallized that to 3 ratings, which was the famous 20-70-10, where the 20-70-10 actually meant performance percentages, where 20% should go into the top tier, 70% stays in the middle, 10% is the one where Jack actually, in other words, he was called, for the ones who know Neutron Jack, he called this the bottom 10%, and he was encouraging leaders to actually get rid of that 10% every year. So the way how Jack was talking about forced ranking, it was interesting, because when he was talking publicly about it, there were a lot of people quite shocked about it and being confused. How can you do that? You know, how can you force such a tough decision? Also, getting rid of people on such a huge organization. And but the way he talked about it to me made perfect sense from the beginning. The way how he talked about it was that, look, if you pick 10 people all across the organization, doesn't matter which function, doesn't matter which geography, but you just look at all of them and you look at them, how do they contribute versus their expectation, versus their own expectation. Do they overachieve? Do they meet their objectives, or do they underachieve? You can always rank these 10 people from 1 to 10. And then how he was talking about it, that you can always find a better person from your bottom one, from the market, which was actually, it was actually true those years. It worked very well. There was a great benefit of this system, is that it forced every manager to think about their own teams, that the least good, let's put it this way, the least good member of the team how can I find a better one from either inside or from another organization? But it actually helped a continuous upgrade of talent culture, which was working for a while. But let's be honest, as we were entering the 20th century and Jack was obviously leaving GE, it was not, it started to have some hiccups in the 21st century, and from two angles, actually. One angle was that there was actually harder and harder to find that 10% replacement from outside who were better than our 10%. And then second thing, that we were getting more and more pressure from all kinds of outside bodies, including the unions and even government bodies, of the fairness of the force ranking system. So we were softening that system up. Now, one of the most interesting piece was that when we get rid of the forced part, we still kept the 20-70-10. And interestingly, for the first couple of years, even though there was no more forced ranking, the rating scale was actually almost exactly 20-70-10. So that tells a lot about the strengths of GE's culture around performance management and how much it was embedded in our people leaders skill set. So the other very important thing in GE's performance management approach has always been the what and the how. So we've always measured performance, the pure performance versus objectives. And the other thing was the how. And in order to measure the how, which is soft skills, how we call them is G behaviors or G values, how you rate on that. It might be ambiguous. And in some countries, especially in Europe, it might even be on the verge of, is it legal to do such kind of measurements? Now, the way you can make that work is that you define well what you measure. So it actually worked perfectly in GE, in my mind. And the way we did it, the way we made it work is that we had very specific description of expected behaviors for every single value. And then you could easily then compare or measure whether that behavior is observable or not. So that's how we created these 9 blocks. And I know, the 9 blocks were all over the HR books, and a lot of other companies are using it one way or another. For us, in our 9 blocks, again, the way we used to talk about them is that, and again, this was, so for the ones who are interested, when we changed our performance management system, the big change have happened in 2016, actually, when we moved to the famous PD at GE, the no rating system. But before that, our so-called EMS system, employee management system, was on since 1976. So this GE system was on for 40 years with minor adjustments before it finally have been, I could say, radically changed. But in this 9 block tool, again, let me and forgive me for talking about Jack again. He's not with us anymore, but I think he left a legacy which is worth remembering. And some of the basics of today's performance management somehow lies in my mind on some of his thoughts. So how he was talking about the 9 block was that, look, guys, you have 2 quadrants of this 9 block that is easy to deal with. Yes, you have the guys who are meeting all the performance, and they are also overachievers on the values or have the best role modeling. So you promote them; they are your stars. You have the other corner, which obviously he was explaining, that's your bottom 10. You get rid of these guys who are not meeting either of the 2. But the most interesting quadrants were the 2 opposite ones, where you have those guys who are not meeting the performance, but you kind of know that they are doing the right approach, they have the right values, they are team players, they are doing the effort. So for them, you need to ask, did we do everything for them to succeed? Are they in the right role? Did we develop them enough? Did we coach them enough? And we certainly need to give them a second chance or a third. Obviously, at one point, you expect performance from everybody, but you need to ask these questions before. And then last but not least, the quadrant that I kind of like the most in terms of his teaching or approach was that, you have those guys who are delivering the performance for you, and everybody knows they are an asshole, and they are screwing up your internal teamwork, they are not following guidelines, they are delivering the numbers, but everybody knows they are not doing it the way how it's expected in the company. So what do you do with those? So Jack's guideline was fire them first. And I still have that echoing in my ears. It's not easy to do that sometimes, but if you do that, I think you do a great service for your culture and actually bringing up the morale in the organization in a lot of cases. So that's a little bit how the old system worked in GE. Now, I also want to talk to you about, I'm just checking on time, about how we changed and what have changed when we moved into the new performance system for GE. So the case for change, first of all, was coming at the time when GE was, with Jeff Immel's leadership, was moving into the digital world. We've created a large digital organization in every single GE business. We are hiring a lot of software engineers. We are moving a lot of, we had organizations like the shared services organizations that we created that were more contemporary. We were hiring a lot of Gen Y type of employees. And obviously with them, the kind of old system was not working very well. First, second of all, as we started to analyze what we are doing, we realized, and for the ones who've read articles in HBR, there's the famous article about Deloitte's change. So we had very similar approach those years. We did a self-analysis in GE, and we realized that we are spending millions of hours, management hours, on finally creating a number, a rating, that pisses up almost everybody. Yes. So for the 70% of your organization, you're going to say you're in the middle, and most of them are actually thinking that they are above. So it only pleases your top 20%, and you spend on them, a huge amount of hours. And when I'm saying this, the way how it worked, the EMS system, it worked in GE, it took hours and hours to write your EMS. It was all about the past. So it was really all the discussion. It was once per year review. So very traditional, as probably all of you have something similar or experienced in the past. So it was a very old school system. It worked for its time, but it was time to change. And to change first, we realized that there is only probably one touch point per year at best with between our employees and managers. And that was all the discussion was about the past. And even the content, nobody was listening to, because the ultimate question was, what's my rating? So that's the reason why we ended up getting rid of the rating, provocatively almost, kind of getting rid of that threat, if you like, and turning the discussion into something more future related. So the first step of the change, we wanted to have more frequent discussions, more coaching approach. And for that, at that time, we haven't found, back in 2016, 15, when this was all discussed, the right external tools. So in GE, we had a lot of digital brains, let's put it this way, and we just used that for our own advantage. So we developed our own tool, a quick mobile enabled feedback tool. But what I wanted to also talk about here is that when you change such a large cultural element like performance management in an organization, culture change always goes with language change as well. So we started to also think about the language we are using, not just the tool. And we realized that words like feedback started to have such a negative meaning that people didn't like it. Yet what we wanted to do, we wanted to actually promote to have more feedback, if you like. So we actually changed the word. We instead of feedback, we started to use insights. And instead of performance meetings, we started to have touch points. Instead of goals and objectives, we started to have priorities, all suggesting that this is, priorities versus goals. This is not your long-term goal. This is something that you have right now. You have a few of them, and it's very current. And you want to move them, and you want to change. And in this tool, with the new mobile-based tool, you could easily give to insights, consider or continue insights to each other. in order to facilitate the more insights, at the beginning, we installed the system in a way that the insights were only visible to the individual who was receiving it. So no HR, no manager have been able to see the insights. Again, our thinking was, obviously it will be good for HR to see that, it will be good for the manager to see that, but if you want to create true insights, if you want to make sure that it's truly developmental for the person who receives it, you want to keep it as confidential as possible for the individual. And actually it worked for us perfectly. What's very important here in all of the communication, how we launched this large change, we talked a lot about that we're shifting the ownership of performance management from HR, from the people leader, actually to the employee. And we actually encouraged the employees to share. So it was not about that we didn't want to share insights. We wanted to share the insights, but we wanted the employee to share the insights, even the considered ones. So one of the things we've done, for example, to encourage that we had town hall meetings, and all the town hall meetings were starting with our senior meetings. For example, I was in global operations at the shared service organization at that time, and we had Shane Fitzsimons, who was the global leader of the organization. He came into a town hall meeting, and he, instead of putting up business slides, he actually put up the slides first, which was his own consider insights that he was receiving from his own team. What should he do differently in order to succeed? And when you see something like that from a senior leader, obviously people will follow. And a lot of other middle-level people leaders have seen him as a role model, and they started to do the same thing. And they started to role model and demonstrate that they also want to share with their own teams what feedback they received from their team. So again, for us, this PD at GE, it was a mobile-enabled tool with a new vocabulary, with employee-owned, quick and easy to use. We shifted the discussion from 80% in the past to 80% to the future, and we kind of also shifted the culture around it from a command and control mode to an empower and inspire, which was part of the transformation that we wanted to achieve. Now, did it succeed? I think the ultimate question maybe a lot of you are asking. Well, to my mind, it did. Did it succeed everywhere? Not really, to be very honest. It did succeed better in some organizations than in others. And particularly it succeeded very well in organizations that were more ready for it, let's put it this way. So in the digital parts, in the shared services organizations, in the more advanced organizations like Capital, like GE Healthcare, actually it was a big success. In some of the more traditional industrial organizations in GE, we were struggling more, particularly around the manufacturing areas, not to have a rating. And when you had more union involvement, we also got a lot of critics around if you don't have a final rating, and that's a very important factor as well to take into account. GE wanted to keep pay for performance and differentiation with pay for performance at the same time having no ratings. Now, again, for the organizations that I've seen, it actually works perfectly well as long as your manager is able to explain to your employees, why are you getting that salary increase? What are the reasons and how did it link to your own performance? But obviously it is actually linked to the skills of the people leader. And certainly some of the critics that we received that you eliminate a bit of transparency by eliminating the final rating when you still do salary changes linked to individual performance. So again, because of these reasons, and because that you've seen in the last years, GE was moving a little bit sideways in terms of cleaning up the portfolio, and we actually sold the capital businesses. We are not talking about digital anymore. We only stayed with 4 mainly industrial businesses, which required more clarity about some kind of a rating. So we were moving backwards some kind of a combined system. So we would never go back to an old one rating system, but having some elements of future looking rating, like the model of Deloitte, for the ones who've read about that in HBR, I recommend it actually to everybody. That's where G is probably going to end up, but this is an evolving thing. So I can't tell you what the end result is, because the end result is still in evolution. So that's a little bit what I wanted to share with all of you. I'm sure I missed a lot from what I wanted to say, but let's open it up maybe for others and for questions. And I'm very happy to discuss some of our experiences with all of you.
Sandor, thanks. That was fascinating. And I love, I've heard the GE story from so many different perspectives, but most of them were outsiders to GE. So to hear it from somebody who's lived at the coalface, I think is super fascinating. And thanks for sharing and being so transparent. The questions are already rolling in, so we're going to kick off with the questions. And folks, please do add your questions, your comments, your thoughts in. This is a community discussion from here, so we'd love to hear from you, the audience. But Silver has kicked us off with 3 different questions, so we're going to have to get through them all. Now, you touched on some of this already, Sandor, but if there's anything you want to deep dive further into, Silver's asking, when you moved away from the rating system, how did you link performance with rewards and talent management?
Yeah, so that was a big debate in GE, yes. And some organizations, if you read some case studies, actually went to the point of actually getting rid of pay for performance as well at the same time. But for us, in GE, it was like almost already getting rid of ratings was such a culture shock to some of our leaders, let's put it this way, that I think that's how far we could go. And the pay for performance piece was very important to keep. So for us, what we try to do and what we educated our leaders to do is that, look, in every single case, if you have a good discussion, so we still kept the summary touch point. That's a very important part of the answer. So we had regular touch points, which now were frequent throughout the year, managed through this digital tool. And the digital tool was actually helping you to have a summary touch point at the end of the year. So in other words, all the kind of priorities that you defined throughout the year, and you made notes to close them out one by one, discuss with your manager, then on the insights that you receive, both continues and considers, at the end of the year, the system automatically created you a summary touchpoint document.
Yeah.
That you could edit as you wanted. You kept the ones that you wanted to keep. You didn't keep the ones you didn't want to keep. And then you had a discussion with your manager. But when you had the manager discussion, actually you already talked 80% out of that in the past. Yes. So you didn't have to go back to everything that you've talked throughout the year. It was a very quick summary. And then talking about what do we do with this? How happy you are with the performance that you've done in the last year, how much you've achieved overall your objectives. And it was a much easier discussion in this respect. It was quite transparent that, look, these objectives you've achieved, these objectives you didn't achieve. So linking it to the question here, that's the way how we linked it to the performance pay part. Yes, they said, look, we kind of agreed that you've achieved these objectives, but there were some that you haven't achieved. So, your overall performance was, good, but could have been even better if you achieve all of them. So if you have a good manager, the good managers could easily explain, what were the specific reasons of giving a higher or a lower salary increase or bonus.
Okay.
For that performance.
So just for clarity, then, was performance more based on goal achievement as opposed to the behavioral element? You didn't bring the behavioral element in, or
both still, we both still,
okay,
still use the behavioral element as well, but the behavioral element was more coming from the insights, kind of the how you achieved, you've done a lot of great things, what were the kinds. In the insights, we observed that there were a lot of the kind of soft part coming in. Insights, and
so the employee could bring their insights into the discussion and go, oh, I've got all this feedback from my colleague, or I've got all these insights from my colleagues.
You can always say that, if somebody was showing no consider insights, yes, because we are not enforcing. We said, look, you sit down with your manager and you should show your consider insights. So an individual might decide not to show the consider insights, but this is not happening in a vacuum. Yes. So first of all, the people leaders do know their teams. So if somebody is coming up with no consider insight, that's a bit awkward. Yes. So then you have a different type of discussion and how come, and I received that feedback. So there's obviously, in order for this to work, you need a very open internal culture where it is absolutely normal that some of this feedback is not going to the individual only. If it doesn't change the behavior, for example, if you get a considerate site, but it doesn't change the behavior, in G, it's very typical that then you go to the manager, or you could go to a peer or somebody else, to HR, to ask for help. So once you have issues like that, it will surface one way or another. And the best way to surface if you do it yourself.
Yeah, super. So I think you've answered Silver's next question. If not, Silver, please do get in touch again. But he has a third question before we move on to some of the other questions. Can you tell in a few words what the Deloitte system is?
Yeah. So just to also once more, I think as you said, I've answered the second one, but I think it's not either or, it's both. You need an app in order to facilitate your discussions throughout the year, but the key is actually the discussion, not the tool.
I 100% agree. And I think the tool is a great enabler of a better discussion, of a more meaningful conversation, but it shouldn't replace it.
No. But here as well, let me give you another very interesting observation. A lot of our I shouldn't use old school. I would say a lot of our experienced leaders were very concerned about the considerate sites. How do you give a considerate site meaningfully on an app? I much rather go and talk personally to the individual when I want to give a serious feedback or performance considerate site, which is, I'm not saying it's not true. Actually, it's much better way to do it personally if you can. But in today's world, sometimes you have limitations, not geographic locations, etc. And then the second part where I wanted to lead this to is that when we hired a lot of Gen Y type of employees, actually we started to get an insight from them that, guys, I'm actually much more happy to receive a considerate site on the app, so that first I can read it. We can totally take out the emotional piece by the time I meet with my manager. And after that, we can talk about the content rather than an emotional reaction. So it was interesting, how you kind of try to merge cultures by using the app. And it was facilitating. It was helping us to do that.
Yeah, we get a lot of that feedback as well from our sites around people's comfort levels with having the time to digest feedback before the face-to-face conversation happens. And particularly for the more introverted profile who needs time and space to digest before they react. That it's a much more comfortable experience to receive a certain amount of feedback on an app before the discussion happens. So yeah, it's a really interesting one.
So for the last question, the Deloitte system, what they introduced, as far as I understand, so I'm not from Deloitte, so here I'm only reading the articles. I think what they introduced is a 4-question tool that are forward-looking questions, where they are asking, if it's your money, what would you do with this guy? Would you promote him? Would you want to keep it on your team? So instead of asking a rating, an assessment of a past performance, you're actually asking a decision from the individual. If it's your money, if it's your company, what would you do with this guy? And based on these 4 questions, then they make the decisions for performance, for pay, etc.
Yeah, that's right.
So in a nutshell, but I very much recommend you to go to HBR and read the article. I think it's a 2016 article, and you can read it.
Yeah. Kieran makes the point that he loves the point about a shift in language going with culture change, which is so true. And I think that's such a great comment, because a lot of people are starting to rebrand things like feedback, which is, that classic book feedback and other dirty words. It is kind of a dirty word, and we see a lot of that as well, people rebranding it and giving it a new fresh look and face. But here's a question from Dennis. Dennis is asking, Dennis, we have to talk, Dennis. With regards to the technology you're using, you mentioned more frequent conversations. What tools are you using within this COVID context? And Sandor, if you don't mention Tandem, we'll have words.
Well, there are great tools out there.
Particularly Tandem.
and seriously, it was not a point of advertisement here, but I think, as I mentioned very briefly, at the time when GE have introduced this for one way or another, and I was not part of of the decision-making team, but I was part of the early implementation team. And at that time, we were not finding on the market easily something that fit immediately GE's needs. And on top of it, we had a bunch of digital software engineers sitting idle that we just hired. And we said, well, why not giving them this task, and why not them developing something specific for GE? So the tool is PD at GE. It's a proprietary tool which is only worked in GE as far as I know. We didn't sell it to anybody, but there are a lot of good tools out there. And in some discussions with Aisling, when we've looked at the tool that our Tandem have, if I would have seen that as a decision maker at the time and this was interesting GE, I probably wouldn't have wasted the time of our software developers. I would have
missed opportunity for our Tandem there.
It's much more. It can actually do much more than our tool have been able to do.
Thank you. Okay, so Martin is asking, okay, we touched on this, but slightly different angle. How did you manage the budgetary aspect as opposed to the forced ranking system?
Ooh, interesting question. So, and a complex question to answer, because at the end, you always have a budget to run salary increases, but the way we manage salary increase budgets in GE is that we try to bring it as high as possible. I mean, the budgets, and not necessarily pushing it down to every single team leader, because if you do that, you can't really differentiate. Yes, if you have small teams of 5 people at the end, and you have to differentiate between the 5 people, and you give them a budget for an average increase of 1.5% in France, for example, then some of them will get 1.7 and the other will get 1.2. That's not differentiation in our language. So what we try to do, obviously, we try to keep the budgets for all these teams, but we actually, for some of the stars or ones that were rising through this tool, obviously, which again, for me, it's very important to emphasize once more that despite having a no rating system, it was still very easy to spot, the top performers, who get all the great feedback and who are achieving the results. And for them, we wanted to make sure that we give more. And like, budget cannot be a limit to reward your top talent, or in fact it can, but then you need to think about, where do I take it from? So the overall budget you have to meet for the organization, but you need to think about how you allocate between sub-organizations. So the way we manage that, Martin, is that we try to obviously do a first planning, and then we pulled it up one level and reviewed how, from an organization, a larger organization point of view. So in Hydro, for example, we always kept some reserve for the overall organization, and then we balanced it out between some organizations that we knew that they were not performing very well, or we had others that really overperformed. So in terms of budget, if we would have just purely followed the budget of those organizations, we wouldn't have differentiated fairly. I hope I'm clear.
Yeah. Did you give guidelines to the managers, Sandor, about, so they did know that the differentiation was encouraged, so to speak?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have an anonymous attendee here asking, please speak more practically on how the past focus discussions were switched to 80% future focus discussions, the touch points.
Yeah, so this was a very important part here. And as I mentioned, again, the way this EMS system worked in GE, that was almost like a ritual. And I don't know, some of you might find similarities here. But so for us, the reason why it was so past focused, you talked about the last year, but every single word counted. You had to spend a lot of time of how you wrote your EMS, because then it was reviewed by your manager, by the 1/1 manager. So again, your career sometimes was more depending on how you actually write your EMS than what you've done. So again, then because you didn't have any discussions throughout the year, or in few exceptions. Yes, most of the times we had one performance discussion. So that discussion then had to be about what happened throughout the year. So you ended up talking about things that happened in January and February and March in next December. Very honestly, in my experience, that led to a lot of conflicts as well. Yes, because after so much time, you might end up with a very different assessment from your leader versus how you remember those things. So again, the intention was, why don't we give feedback at the time when it actually happens, and encourage that with the system, with the tool, with everything. And this is how these touch points, we encourage them to have at least one per quarter, but we actually encourage one per month, one touch point per month with your manager, and it was owned by the employee. So, it was my role to put it in the calendar of my manager. And in these meetings, obviously, we talked about the actual current performance, and we talked about priorities changing, what's the next focus we have to do. So, and then, by the end of the year, that means that throughout all the year, we've already talked about all of these performance aspects. So there was not a lot when we did the year-end touch point. There was not a lot to talk about the past. We had 1 hour, and before that, we spent that 1 hour on the past. Now we spend that 1 hour almost entirely on the future. Maybe 20% on the quick summary, and 80% of, okay, so what's now? How do we learn from this? How do we change things for the next year? How are priorities? How is your role changing? So it was all, this is how we changed all to kind of future focused.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
It does. We're running fast out of time, and we've still questions pouring in for you. So maybe one last question from Elizabeth here on the soft skills. How do you go about them with biases? Are there programs running for this?
Yes. I mean, as I mentioned to you, when you assess soft skills, it's always so hard. So unless you have a very strong culture, first of all, that accepts these behavioral norms, which was the case in GE, then I guess that might be very difficult to assess. So, but even in GE, the way we've handled this is that let's say you had 5 GE values that you wanted to rate, and they are quite abstract. Yes. So how do you rate somebody on innovation? So we actually started to write down what actual behavior expectations we have. And then we realized that, well, the behavior expectation is very different on a senior management level versus an individual contributor level. So we actually wrote this behavior expectations for every single level in the organization. So you had a lot of data available to see whether, that behavior is observable or not. And it was very transparent, and we actually educated all our employees about the performance management system, including those expectations to the very details, that this is what's expected from you. And once you communicate that wildly through, I think then it starts to become fair to assess against those norms. So that's probably how you can do it.
Yeah, brilliant. There is questions filling up here, but I think we're a little bit out of time to answer them all. But perhaps we can do follow up after the session. I think we could keep you here for another hour with all these questions, Sandor. But I'm
so glad to hear that. That means a lot of people are interested in the topic, which is fantastic.
Definitely, you've sparked a debate and a discussion and a curiosity around all sorts of aspects of this. But from me, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been fascinating. I've loved hearing the insiders piece on this. I had a ton of questions I didn't even get to ask, but we'll have to catch up another time, Sandor. So thanks very much. And over to you, Meg.
Thank you. Just to echo Aisling's thanks to you. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to everybody on the call for not only joining us, but for all your interactions and questions to Sandor. And finally, if you'd like to keep following our Tandem and following the other events that we have coming up in the future and more interesting content, then we're just going to drop the link there to our LinkedIn page. So please feel free to follow us to continue and join our community. And the last note is thank you again, and we'll hope to see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Sandor. Bye-bye.
Thank you, all of you.
Bye.